If you have a choice between remote and face-to-face when you're just starting out, try and get the face-to-face piece. And if you can't, get your face in front of people as much as you possibly can.
Successful leaders make building healthy culture a priority. Meet other leaders who are building a culture where people want to stay and know how to win together.
Hey leaders, welcome back to the Build Your Culture Brand podcast. I have with me today Dr. Peggy Kendall, author of Trust at a Distance. Welcome to the show, Peggy.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to be here.
Peggy's currently professor at Bethel University in communication studies and is a former Fulbright scholar. So I'm excited to hear that story. So the topic today on virtual work, I think is an interesting case study on whether or not you're doing virtual work. It's more about, to me, what I want to glean from this is, how do we still do trust in a technological environment? So trust is such an important part of work, and I call it the currency of work. We need trust at work. It's what makes things work together, relationships and efficiencies and all of that. So I really want to learn from you. But also, for those who are doing virtual work, we're going to share some amazing tips, things I had no idea about that you've been able to learn. And so this first part, I'd like to ask some questions around, what's missing in remote work, and kind of dive into what got you started in even looking at remote work, what led you to write this book. And so I'll just cue it up that way.
Well, I've been looking at the way that technology impacts communication and how we see ourselves in relationships ever since MySpace came around. That was my first book that I wrote. It was on MySpace. Can you remember MySpace? No, probably not, because nobody
I
can and
remember
nobody buys my
MySpace.
book. So yeah, note to self, never put like the name of the technology in the title of the book. So back then,
True.
even I realized that somehow when you put a piece of technology in between like you and me, it might seem like we're actually communicating the same, but we're not. It's different, right? It changes things. And so a few years ago, I started working with a remote team, and I saw those exact same things come up. The exact same things that I saw when I was looking at how MySpace was impacting our children. I saw some of the same things. I saw people making assumptions about what other people were saying or thinking. The more connections they had, really, the more lonely they felt. So it was kind of some of the same issues popping up 25 years later. And this time on a much bigger scale with large organizations, small organizations, and even when I don't do work remotely, I'm still emailing all the time, texting people. There's still that piece of technology that's changing the way that we communicate.
It's incredible. And I know organizations are looking at remote work again, and kind of re-examining whether or not that's beneficial to an organization. If an organization chooses to continue with work from home or virtual work, what are some things we need to look out for to really manage? So you have a leader at work, let's say, and they're managing someone distantly. What are some things a manager can do to really improve efficiencies and relationships virtually?
Well, first of all, buy my book, Trust at a Distance, right? It's all about how managers can do strategies for managers to connect with their people. But um, I think the first thing is to realize that uh, a virtual space, remote work is not the same as the way you don't manage the same way as you do face to face. So there's a couple of things missing. First of all, I don't get all of the information. So like when I'm looking at you, all I see is like this and that's it. So I'm not getting all of the information that I would if we were just sitting and having coffee, right? So there's missing information and there's missing connection, because one of the things that tends to happen in remote spaces is it's task oriented. It's like, I got a meeting, we go in, we talk about what we need to, and we're out. And I'll tell you what, when I go into my office at the university, wow, I work, I work, but I chit chat. We're in the hall, we talk about this. I'm going to a class, going to the bathroom, going to lunch. I see people, I sit and talk. You don't get any of that in a remote workplace. So I think the key is to remember that the things that happen naturally in real life, you have to recreate in a virtual workspace. So you have to recreate those sort of informal interactions. You have to recreate those natural connections that happen. And for me, this is one of my biggest things that I've learned. I live in Minnesota, so we tend to be a little bit passive aggressive up here. I don't know if you know
Okay.
many Minnesotans.
Yes,
Um,
I do. All right.
and so I tend to use my face a lot instead of actually saying what I'm thinking. So I notice, when I can actually watch myself, I notice when I'm rolling my eyes, I make like stupid faces. Um, and in a remote workspace, people don't catch that stuff. It doesn't work. So you have to be so much more intentional about using words. And sometimes that feels really awkward, but people don't pick up on emotions. They don't pick up on nonverbals. They don't pick up on some of those relational cues in a virtual workspace like they would if we were sitting face to face. We call that in my field verbalizing relational content. So, in other words, if we really do have some feedback, we have to say it with our words instead of just making, frustrated faces.
Yeah. Well, just to get real practical then on that one topic of there's something missing, and because we don't have this natural ability to just bump into someone at the water cooler type conversations. So what are some ways that you've noticed people are able to compensate or make up for that?
I mean, that's a really important question. So, how do you kind of infuse those natural things that happen kind of spontaneously? And, some of it is in these predictable meetings, like a weekly meeting. You start off with some social interactions. Sometimes I've heard people talk, a number of managers, it's like, yeah, when I start off a meeting and say, like, how was your weekend? People are like, ugh, and it's just kind of awkward and weird. And if that's the case, then you start off with like, show me one thing in your office that represents a good memory to you. What is one, a structured question? What's one thing you were excited about for today? So having some structured questions that helps kind of build the foundation of trust before you can have these natural interactions. I think some of the other ideas that managers have shared with us is having like office hours. So I'll tell you what doesn't work is when a manager or leader says to an employee, hey, if you have any questions, just let me know. Give me a call. It's like,
Okay.
I am not going to call you because you're busy, man. I don't know. Like, what if you're in the middle of
I
something?
don't know
What
when
if,
I can call you.
I don't know. That feels so weird. I'm not going to call you. So, how can you make it easier for people to actually ask those questions, right? So, office hours, it's what I do at the university. At 12 o'clock every day, I'm having lunch or whatever, and I have my Zoom on. And if you want to just pop in and ask a question, that's great. So, providing some of those easy spaces, I'd say.
Those are good. One other thread that you mentioned there is that there's a hidden part of our story when we're on Zoom or some, this virtual kind of relationship. And even now, like you said, we don't see the full context of even our rooms or our lives. And so who's responsible for making up the difference in the hidden part of our story? How do we manage that, and who's responsible for managing it?
I mean, that's a really important question. And I'll tell you, when I first started doing my research, I was talking to remote workers. And it's like we came up with all these different things that we thought the managers needed to do. You need to provide these spaces. You need to provide predictable check-ins. And then I started working with David Horsager, who is my co-author on this book. And he works with leaders all the time. And he looked at that and he's like, it's not that easy. These leaders are really busy. And sometimes it's awkward. And so I think it's both, right? So I think the manager does have to create structures and spaces for this information to be exchanged, right? So predictable check-ins, the kind that don't get missed, right? So you show up and it might be 10, 15 minutes. I just have a quick question, or I just have, a little bit of feedback on that last thing that we sent out, something like that. So we meet for 10 minutes in the morning, maybe as a group, maybe individually. Creating those spaces for communication is how managers can really build trust. But I think it is a little short-sighted to think that it's just all in the manager, because I found, especially when I started a new remote team, I found I would sit there and I would have these attitudes and like, they don't know what they're doing, or why can't they work harder, or I think they're mad at me. And when I'm sitting there all by myself in my office, like that's all I got. And so I think some of this is on me too, because I have to make sure that I'm verbalizing relational content, right? That if I have a question or if I'm concerned about something, I have to actually step up and say something. If I'm frustrated with my boss, as hard as it is, it just festers when I'm sitting here by myself. So, you know, part of it is on me. I have to verbalize some of the things that I'm thinking. I don't think it works to be a passive remote employee. Because if you think about it, you're working, doing your job, you hardly ever talk to your boss. Well, I mean, what is the boss supposed to think? The boss is ultimately responsible for what you're doing. And I think it's really easy for people to feel like they're being taken advantage of. Like, are they really working, or are they like just screwing around all day? So part of that I do think is on the employee to make sure that you have this two-way trust, this communication happening in a predictable, authentic way.
Well, Peggy, thank you so much for helping us understand what are some of the things that are missing when we do remote work. I think that helps obviously with remote work, but also some of those things are just more highlighted in virtual work, and they actually still show up in, face-to-face work. So it helps us understand a little bit more about some of the hidden story that we can work on in whatever work environment we're in. But as we dive deeper into this idea of virtual work, one of the things, that we're faced with is the technology that we're actually using. You've already alluded to that some, but now here we are several years into it. We're using Zoom, we're using other, mediums of getting together, and we're starting to notice some stress fractures from using the technology. So tell us a little bit about what the research is telling us in how it's impacting our lives.
I think there's two technology tools that I have found to be problematic. And the first one is Zoom. I don't know about you, but there are days when I just have one Zoom meeting after another, and it is exhausting. Like, I have meetings in my in-person office back to back, and it's not the same. And for a long time, I was trying to figure out, why am I so tired at the end of these Zoom meetings and I just cannot handle one more? It's because we're talking about the same sorts of things. I found that there's actually quite a bit of research on something called Zoom fatigue, right? And according to this research, they say that things like right now, I've had direct eye contact with you for like, I don't know, for quite some time. And in real life, we don't we don't do that. And so that takes like extra relational and cognitive energy, right? And there's also cognitive energy because actually, like, I might look like a real person, but I'm actually a bunch of little pixels, together. And our brain is like putting this all together in like this fluid movement. But that's extra cognitive energy. And I think the third thing that has really stood out to me is, I'll just admit it, I watch myself to make sure I look good, because it's hard to look good, right? That extra energy to be like, yeah, I think I'm looking okay now, just adds more cognitive energy. So according to these researchers, there's a couple of things you can do. Try not to have like direct eye contact all the time. Actually get up and walk around sometimes, because in real life, in between meetings, like, we don't just sit there all day looking someone straight in the face. We get up, we move, those kinds of things. And I'll tell you what, this is the game changer for me. I was getting such bad headaches after these Zoom meetings. And so someone said, turn off the self view so you can't see yourself. And at first it was like, oh, but dude, I gotta look good. How am I gonna know what I'm looking like? But in real life, we don't know what we look like, right? So I turned off the self view, and I'll tell you what, my headaches went away right away. I had so much more energy. So turning off that self view is actually a thing. I think the last thing is, and a lot of the leaders that I've worked with, they say this, that they do this, but in real life, I don't think they do. Schedule 10 minutes in between Zoom meetings, right? Just like to just breathe and to like sit back and get yourself together. Because we have that in real life. We have those extra little moments to kind of catch our breath, like figure out what's going on, but we don't give ourselves that space when we have a calendar right there, and it says like 9 to 10, 10 to 11. So I think putting 10 minutes in between Zoom meetings, turning off the self view, and getting up and walking around every now and then, I think are really good ideas for Zoom. The other thing, that I have found has to do with inner office messaging, like Slack. And I've talked to a lot of leaders who are like, we got so many Slack things. And I say something important on Slack, and then I can't find it. 2 weeks later, I got to go back through all this stuff and I can't find it. And it's just like information overload. Sometimes when you're trying to really concentrate, bang, 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 all these Slack things come up. And so I think we have to be a little bit more intentional about organizing our Slack channels. Everybody knows what goes on each channel. When a project is done, archive the Slack channel so that you don't have all this stuff. And when you're going to sit down and actually concentrate, turn off the Slack channel, turn off the notifications. So those are two things that I have found that are related to technology and the tools and how they impact us.
Well, Peggy, you've spent quite a bit of time researching and preparing for this book you've written. Let me see your book again. It's Trust at a
Trust at a
Distance.
Distance.
So I would encourage everyone to grab a copy and tell us a little bit more. So it's written from the perspective of management, right? From leadership. And so what are some habits that leaders need to build in to even protect themselves from burnout? What would you say
Yeah.
to leaders right
Yeah.
now who are trying to manage virtual work?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is setting expectations. You cannot supervise the same number of people remotely as you can face to face. It takes more work, more intentional time and work to really do a good job managing remote workers,
Wait
because
a minute. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That I would have never guessed this. Okay. So, because in my mind, I feel like you could manage 10 times more people virtually
yeah,
than in person. Help
yeah.
me understand the difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just at this conference and they were talking about AI is going to change remote work because AI can actually manage a huge span of control, right? So, and this guy, like, he was a leader of a big company, and he's like, I don't even have to answer my emails anymore. My AI answers them for me. And my AI don't have to go to all the meetings because my AI will be there and like can be there for me. In fact, he said, my my employees don't even know if it's me or my AI that's responding to them. It's like, dude, like, what? How on earth do you build trust with your employees and motivation and satisfaction and all those things if they never know for sure if they're talking to you or to your AI? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. So, in many ways, like we kind of said before, when you're managing face to face, I manage a department and I can just walk around. I can do a quick walk around, stick my head in, talk to so and so. Oh, they look like they're a little overwhelmed. Like, I'll just sit and chat a little bit with them. They're looking pretty good. That takes 5 minutes. I can't do that remotely, right? I have to actually be intentional. I have to make appointments. I have to put it on my schedule. I can't just pop my head into someone's workday usually, unless you can figure that out somehow. And its result, that's going to take more time, right? And I think you do even have to also spend more time being super clear about what's expected, because I can't measure your time on task anymore. I can't see that you're sitting at your desk for 8 hours and you have your breaks, and I can't see that. So instead, I have to make sure that you have certain goals and outcomes. And I have to be super clear about that. We have to both agree on kind of like, these are the things that you're going to do this week or today. And that takes time. So I think you have to be so much more intentional. It's a little more time intensive to have these kinds of meetings and to be a predictable, available, connected manager in a remote workspace.
If then the effectiveness of work and engagement and all of that is, we're saying, directly related to a humanized relationship, more humanization, and you're saying that it takes an extra amount of work on a manager,
Yeah.
then how do I protect myself against burnout
Yeah.
as a manager?
Yeah. Well, and we talked to a number of leaders asking that kind of question. Because quite honestly, if a leader is in charge of 20 people and you meet with every single one of them, each week, that can be a long time. And so some of the things that they came up with was things like group meetings, these stand-up meetings every morning. So you're still connecting and still accessible, but you got a small group instead. Uh, Another one that I thought was really interesting is one leader would ask the same exact questions. It would 15 minutes each week, the same exact questions. And because the employees knew exactly what those questions were, they'd come, they'd like talk about what they needed, and it required much less energy. So, for instance, some of the things that they asked every time: what can we celebrate? What are your priorities for this week? What are your biggest challenges for accomplishing that? And how can I help? And 15 minutes in, out, people feel connected. And this leader said that once you started doing that, and people were like, they came with answers because they knew exactly how these things went. They would also start to add these little things like, yeah, my mom just got put into assisted living, and that you would never know otherwise. So group connections, quick connections, even a quick 10-15 minute connection each week is better than like a long like review session, once a month or once a year. That's certainly one way to do it, but I think you're right. I think boundaries are an issue for remote workers, whether you're the leader, an employee, manager, mid-level manager, whatever. Because research shows that remote workers tend to work, what is it? 10% more hours than in-person workers. Uh, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. But part of it is, you're sitting at your desk and it's hard to disconnect. You're always on. And if you're not good at setting boundaries, it's like, okay, 5 o'clock, I'm done. Uh, you could sit in front of your computer and work all the time, and I'm definitely guilty of doing that. So I think it's really important to have these boundaries. Otherwise, it just
Yeah.
gets so you're always working, always trying to be, have a family life or whatever. And those boundaries are, I think, exactly what lead to burnout.
What are some best practices for boundaries? I mean, we've heard several of these before, and maybe we could repeat a few, but just help us remember, what are some great ways to set boundaries for working at home?
Well, I mean, I think separation is one thing. So if you can have like a workspace, I remember when I was in college, when I would study in my bed, and so then I'd always fall asleep. Like, I needed separation. Like I should have been studying in the library and sleeping in my bed, right? So if possible, having like a workspace so that when you go to work, you go into your space, and when you're done with work, you go out of the space and you're done. I think some of it too, I find myself answering emails at ridiculous times, which is so bad. Uh, but and I tell people, don't worry about it. You're done at 5 o'clock. Don't worry about it. But then here I'm sending an email to them, at 8 o'clock at night. And sometimes I think it's easy to say, you don't have to deal with this now. Deal with this tomorrow. But I'm role modeling what I expect, right? And so why not just, you can do those schedule send
I was going to
things.
say, yeah, schedule send. That's a great, yeah.
Yeah. So I think role modeling healthy boundaries. I mean, the I may or may not have a leader that I work with that no matter where he is in the world, what kind of vacation it is, his schedule is packed. It's like, what? You gotta just be done. And then when I go on vacation, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I should check in,
Oh, because
right?
of a reverse expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah.
and then one last thing that I do, like I have this end of day ritual. I always, okay, I think I'm done now. I go in, I log my hours, I do this, and I close my laptop and I'm done. And I walk out of the office.
Well, Peggy, before we go, I had one other section I really wanted to touch on, and it was this idea of proximity bias. And so, we're thinking about new people coming into the workforce. Maybe the only experience they're having is a virtual experience. They've never had an in-person work experience. So, tell me a little bit about proximity bias and how we need to be aware of it and what we can do to overcome it.
Yeah. I mean, proximity bias is really going to happen. I see this a lot in places that are trying to experiment with hybrid. Some people are remote, some people are face to face. And, you can say and think, I treat everybody the same, but we just have this natural inclination to pay attention to people who are right in front of us. We know them better. We get to know them better. That's just how that works. And there is an interesting study that came out from the the Society for Human Resource Management last year. And what they found was 2/3 of supervisors overseeing remote workers admitting to believing remote workers are more replaceable than on-site workers. So they're more replaceable. 42%, which is almost half, well, maybe not almost half, but 42% said that sometimes they forget about remote workers when they're assigning tasks, especially some of the big kind of more public tasks, I'd say. So remote workers are going to get overlooked easier. And remote workers tend to get promoted less often than those who are working face to face, even though there's so many studies that show that remote workers are actually more productive and work more hours than the people face to face. So even though we think we are treating everybody the same, unless you're putting in place certain structures and certain procedures and strategies, it's not going to happen. The people that are close to you are going to get these good opportunities. They're going to get promoted more often, and you're going to go to them for advice. You're going to kind of talk to them with the information that you might have or get,
Yeah.
feedback.
They'll have
And
insider information on the project.
exactly. So then the question is, well, so what do you do with that? Because plenty of places have to have remote and hybrid working together. One of the leaders that we talked to, he assigned every remote worker a remote mentor. And it was that mentor's job to meet regularly with the remote employee and to advocate for them, especially when it came to like career promotion, networking opportunities, those kinds of things. And I thought, well, that's pretty sharp.
That's so good. And that goes back to that original question of trust. So when you're assigning someone that you do trust, they've been around long enough where you already trust this mentor to assign a new person to them. they almost get to borrow trust in the
Yeah.
relationship. It's like
Yeah.
sharing that trust relationship.
Yeah. And they, they get the insider information and
They do.
they better understand the culture. And I'll tell you what. So, I work with university students, and these are the kids that were in middle school during COVID. And most of them have never worked in an office. And a lot of these young people are going to get remote jobs. Even a lot of them now have remote internships. They get remote jobs. They've never been in an in-person office. So you can imagine they don't they don't know how an office operates. They don't understand like how to pick up on the culture. Um, and so what I tell my students, first of all, I tell them if you have a choice between remote and face-to-face when you're just starting out, try and get the face-to-face piece. And if you can't, get your face in front of people as much as you possibly can. So volunteer for presentations and chit chat with, make networking appointments. One of the things that one of the leaders talked about was when someone is just hired, they have the first week that they're hired, they make a 20-minute appointment with everybody, in the division. And so that they can get to know every single person, but that other people also get to see their face and get to know them. And it's like, well, that's not a bad idea. It's one way to start to learn what the culture is like and how you're supposed to act and those kinds of things.
I'd love for our listeners to consider having Peggy out, do a keynote, talk about her book. And so you're available for speaking and you're available to do Zoom calls and other kinds of consulting about this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm most excited about is most of the research shows that most remote managers have never had any training in how to do this kind of management in a remote setting. And it is different. So the places that I've seen the biggest change take place is half day, full day workshops with some executive coaching. That's what actually makes a difference, I think.
Okay. And how can people we'll put it in the show notes, but how can people get a hold of you?
PeggyKendall.com
Okay.
and Peggy at PeggyKendall.com.
All right.
That's
And it's Kendall. So look for
right.
PeggyKendall.com and there you go. Love for the
Great.
people to connect with you and find out better ways to work together and build trust.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Build Your Culture Brand podcast. It's been a pleasure to have Peggy on the show. I look forward to connecting with you also on LinkedIn and jrains.com. And you can like and follow our show, buildyourculturebrand.com. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for listening to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, and share. See you next time.